let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the award-winning podcast where we talk about gaining, fetishism, and everything plus size. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're welcoming to the show Courtney Boyer.
Yay, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, honey. How are you today?
I'm so good. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Oh, honey, we were excited to have you on as well. You know, we've had the privilege of saying this to a couple of people. You know, as the listeners, you'll know, we've started reaching out recently to sort of see, like, who wants to come on and have a chat with us? Who wants to share their expertise and see the links and all the rest? And yours was just so fascinating. You come in as a dating coach, you know, the polyamory situation, and we're going to get into all of it, but I just thought the bio was so interesting, and I thought this is going to be a real crackerjack of a conversation. So listen, Courts babes, are you ready to get into it?
Yes, I'm excited.
Ah, marvelous. Well, look, of course, I think a great place to start for any listeners who are unaware of you, haven't come across you before, what is the first thing you want our listeners to know about you?
Oh gosh. Well, one, I am a champion for all things diversity. I really am excited to be here and talk about a subject, or at least address a subject that is typically not discussed in mainstream. It is typically sometimes shrouded in shame or misunderstanding. And so anytime that I can be a part of a conversation that elevates an often misunderstood conversation, that is where I love to be. So I think one of the things, what would they like to know about me? That I am a curious human that wants to make this world a better place.
I love that. I think that's what every person should strive for. And much of your work challenges the idea that desire has to look a certain way. How do you see cultural norms policing who's allowed to be desired, especially when it comes to larger bodies?
Sure. So I think what I see is that desire is gatekept by thinness, youth, and compliance. So typically larger bodies are either erased or fetishized rather than treated as inherently worthy of longing.
Plain and simple. You know, we find that sometimes when we have conversations with people in the broader spectra, you know, not necessarily people in our own communities, sometimes it's really helping people to understand, you know, what we want to promote in terms of fatness and a sense of sexuality rooted in fatness is that it benefits everybody. You know, none of us are exempt from the body fascism of the world that tells us that thinness is the only way to be okay. And the presumption that people in the thinnest of bodies should be the most privileged, of course, within that dynamic, sure, but they absolutely are at the top of the pile and therefore have the furthest to fall. So no one is allowed to be at rest and to simply exist in a body that is fine in any of those narratives. So really, there is that immediate alignment there. And I imagine a lot of the work that you do as a woman focuses on that feminist approach that really needs to uplift women out of a lot of the zeitgeist, because a lot of that body shame is placed on women, right? And we have the privilege to talk to our female feedies about all this. And I think it's just going to be great to get to bring you here into the conversation with all of this today. So I want to bring this up. You know, in Not Tonight, Honey, you talk about women feeling broken around desire. And I would like to dig in a little bit here. How does that belief show up differently for plus size women or femmes?
So one of the things that I struggled with a lot, especially with my own body journey for most of my life, and this is something that I see preached, conditioned with women, is that the idea of I shouldn't want too much, or I should take what I can get. So desire becomes something to apologize for as opposed to trusting.
Well, and at what point did our society decide that desire and ambition became synonymous? Like, or why either one was a bad thing?
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
you have to apologize for being ambitious and being the go-getter. I guess because we were programmed by a generation worth of TV shows that uplifted the cynic. But like,
well, you know, it's come up a lot in a couple of conversations we've had. This sort of enforced humility that to be anything other than humble is wrong. You shouldn't want to be showy. You shouldn't want to talk with your whole chest about how capable you are, because apparently that's inappropriate. And yet, what are we finding constantly? That sort of this first big hurdle of going, no, I don't need to talk myself down. I actually need to talk my shit. I need to fucking pump it up. Yep. talk about all this, I was having a conversation with a girlfriend recently. It comes up every now and again, the one about man spreading, especially on public transport, right? And I understand for a lot of women, it's that sense of, I take up the space that I feel I need to take up. I see men taking up maybe space that they don't feel they need to take up. I will say, full disclosure, as someone who has external facing situations, that tends to be just the comfortable way that one sits when you have external facing stuff. And I don't see
I didn't even know that I was doing something wrong until I heard about it. I'm like, I just was letting my junk
But
breathe.
this is the thing. This is the thing. I don't think it's wrong, because that is just you doing what is naturally within you to be like, well, I've got something down in a situation that needs a little space, because that's just what that is. I don't think the solution is to say men need to take a step back. I think it's to say that women should take a step forward. If you see men manspreading, baby, you better spread. Like, you better take up that space. And, I understand that maybe that might feel differently for different people at different times. But I feel like the solution is never that a group of people should have to take a step back away from what they need. I think it's a case of everyone else can get to take the step forward to join them in occupying that same space. Like airplane seating. The weird detraction is that, why do fat people need bigger seats? Just lose weight to fit in the seats. Baby, it's so they can feel comfortable. And you know who else would benefit from wider airplane seats? Every single one of us who, no matter how big you are, you already feel cramped in that airplane seat.
Well, and you know why they do that is so that they can fit more people on the plane and make more money. That's the whole reason. They could spread them out further, but they don't, because they want to cram as many passengers on as possible.
I think for me, it's I totally understand your point about external facing and room and stuff. I think it's important that a lot of men just have self-awareness of that, of like, oh, I'm taking up space that could infringe on other people's. And a lot of times I think it's easy to say, oh yeah, just take up space, spread up. But if you've never been given permission for that, or you have attempted to take up space and you've been bullied or shamed for doing that, it's a lot harder to then feel safe to go ahead and take up that space.
Very important. Thank you for the call in.
Yeah,
very,
I
very
totally
important.
Understand where that comes from as well.
No, totally. But again, the reason for these conversations is so important. And I think something else for Tim and I to be cognizant of here, reasons why I think it's very important that we have more people of all that perspective coming onto the pod, because we can only ever have the perspective that we know and can hold space for. So thank you for bringing that here.
You're welcome.
To today.
But, I'm curious, many of our listeners exist at the intersection of size, kink, and queerness to some degree. How do you help people untangle authentic desire from shame imposed by society?
One of the questions that I love to encourage, especially my clients, to ask is, we take a deep breath and we slow down and have them ask themselves, what feels alive versus what feels performative? Because shame often feels very loud and urgent, whereas authentic desire is quieter and embodied.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? You say there's a line in the sense of that performance. Because I suppose running it through my own lens of shame and how that intersects, because I suppose it's twofold when I think of gaining, at least. So there's the element of the human. As I go into the world, I'm inhabiting a larger body, becoming larger, and there's a sense of shame the world puts on you for existing as such. And so you have to navigate that and learn how to process it. But then on the other side of it, you have a sense of sexual shame, not as a negative necessarily, but as fantasy. A great many people in the space who indulge and love a sense that they want to be teased, almost humiliated. They love and in many ways, I think the fantasy element of clothes issues in public.
Well, I was just going to say, I can kind of relate to what this means, because my late husband wanted me to talk dirty in bed, and I wasn't really good at it because it always came out inauthentic and sounded like a cheesy porno. When I got into the leather scene, began to explore my masculinity and dominant side, and people wanted me to role play the part of the leather daddy, that became so much easier, because I was for the first time, I was really exploring what it meant to be a dominant masculine man. So that came off much, much more authentic. And so I get what you were, saying by all of that.
Yeah. So I think in terms of, it's a fine line. So even for myself as a polyamorous woman, I struggle, who grew up in purity culture where sex outside of marriage was terrible. And the idea of having sex outside of marriage, or even wanting sex with somebody once you're married that's not your spouse, is like blasphemous. And so sometimes I struggle with this. Am I wanting to be sexually active with a partner because I actually want to, like because it brings me joy, or because I can? And it's part of this performance or this expectation that because I can, I will, or because I can, I should. And so sometimes I struggle with that of, is this really what I want? Or is this what I'm told that I should want because this is freedom and this is what freedom looks like to other people?
Right, absolutely. It's something that gainers experience a lot. Many of us would consider ourselves what gets bandied around as belly-sexual, which often to us simply means we're not genitally driven. We're not necessarily penetratively driven. That kind of classic sex narrative just doesn't compute in a lot of regards. And don't get me wrong, of course, there are plenty of people who still enjoy that. Sure. But sometimes the question becomes, do you want that because that is what you want? Or do you want that because everyone says, well, that's what sex is? Yes. So therefore, that's what you have to mirror, to perform in order to make, the sense of successful sex happen. And I think the joy in leaning into, especially with what we get to do, what we understand for ourselves, is I don't have to do none of that. Full disclosure, have not had that typical kind of sex in a very long time. I don't miss it,
Same
not one
here.
jot. But I get to have the fulfillment that I know that feels good to me. And I feel way more fulfilled sexually than I ever would have done trying to do the penetrative stuff. So I think that makes a lot of sense. It's not always what gets told is the norm, is going to be for everyone. And there's a sense of perhaps responsibility to all of us to go, if it feels incongruent especially, but even if it doesn't, open yourself to the opportunity to explore that. Give yourself the chance to figure it out, because you may have just gone, this is just how that feels. You don't have any other point of reference. But then you try something different, and then you go, well, now hold on a second. Revelations are happening. My desire for sex and the ways in which I can have it are totally different. And the beauty, of course, within the broader spectrum of queerness is that you can have it exactly the way you want it. So I appreciate that framework.
You're welcome.
Well, and looking back, like when I'm somebody who has a string of one-night stands under his belt, and they were all sort of very typical. Some of them were usually chemically altered, but they were always empty. I never really left any of those feeling satisfied. Of the kinds of experiences I've had with members of my community, again, like it didn't really end up in penetrative sex most of the time, but was far more fulfilled. Like just it felt so much better after every experience. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So to dig in a little bit here then, what role do you think that sense of bodily autonomy plays in reclaiming desire, especially for people who feel that sense of scrutiny or fetishization?
It is foundational. Like I can't emphasize bodily autonomy. It truly is a foundation. So when your body has been publicly commented on, choosing when and how and if you're even touched becomes a radical act of self-trust.
And I will say there is an interesting experience in the gaining journey there that, we try to touch on at times, but I wonder, I'd like to speak to more people outside of the community about it, because in essence, the experience of weight gain, especially intentional, is one of the few examples that we see in the human experience where someone can step intentionally from a position of privilege into disadvantage and into marginalization. And so there is a sort of catch-22 of, as I say, some people can appreciate a sense of sexualized shame where they go, oh, people tease me or call me names, and I can enjoy that. That's a fulfillment, a recognition of my transformation that was intentional, brilliant. But also, we get to see in real time the ways in which people in our lives treat us differently, and not the least of which, the potential of sex with people outside the space who don't necessarily know that it's intentional. They just see us as another fat person who's looking to hook up. But friends and family, operations within the workplace, and treatment from people even just on the street. It's a very interesting experience to see the ways in which being of a different form can radically shift how people either the positivity in which they engage with you or the negativity. There are stories online of people of size who they've got their shopping trolley, they're doing the whatever groceries, and they've gone down the aisle to grab something, and they come back and someone's either taken something out of their basket or put something in there with the inference of, you don't need that, or maybe you need this.
That is horrific.
The concept of, I have the right to decide what you put in your body because I have decided who and what you are and what is best for you is absolutely mad. I mean, even just taking it slow, the notion of being in a different body and people, and they're always skinny, they feel they have the perfect advice for you on how to fix your body. And not even just fatness. We've heard this recently from people who've been on the podcast who've experienced pregnancy. The ways in which I have a human growing inside of me. I'm literally meant to look like this. I'm meant to overeat to feed the baby so they don't fucking die. And your question is, how do I look as skinny as possible?
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing.
And I'd be curious, you write about shedding sexual shame. How do you see fat phobia specifically shaping the sexual stories people tell themselves?
I see it as it teaches people that their pleasure is conditional. So that the desire must be earned through shrinking, not necessarily through presence, just existing.
Something that, no, I'm gonna say it. Something that I sometimes look askance within our space. So I'm a call to people here on this one. I don't know sometimes how I feel about the feeder encourager archetype expressing the thought that a gainer must prove themselves in order to be valid within a dynamic. Now, again, catch-22 here. In order to me to say, I'm actively putting on the weight, I'm changing my body, some amount of beyond the norm must be done in order to change what I am. Otherwise, I wouldn't change. So there's a certain amount of, you must do the thing, you must, etc., etc.
We get a lot of comments about, like, we should be able to, you're a gainer, you should be able to eat 3 pizzas. You're a gainer, you should be able to eat 10 Big Macs. You're a gainer. Like they come with a lot of expectations that I think stems from a lot of the fiction that was written within our community, because there was a time when there was a lot less visual representation for us, but there was much more written word.
Yeah. So I think it's all a part of that great unpacking that I think many communities are going through, right? I have an expectation, an understanding of something, and then I go and do the thing, and then that's very different to the realities that I'm experiencing. And sometimes it is a question of sitting down with your beanie babies and deciding who gets what in which pile, what goes where, understanding. Because I don't think we need to throw away the fantasy. I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I think some of us need to really realign what is fantasy, what is reality, what can be negotiated in the middle, and then maybe what just falls away as a result. Like, maybe we don't need all that. Maybe we can come with less expectation and more opportunity to say, hey, I'd like to do the fucking with you. Let's figure out what that's going to look like between us two specifically, rather than I have a pre-built framework in my mind that I think to myself must be fulfilled. And then if it isn't, it's incomplete, it's a fail, there's judgment, there's feelings of inadequacy, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, kink communities often offer permission to explore desire more openly. And I want to know, from your perspective, what can mainstream relationship culture learn from kinky or non-normative spaces?
I don't identify as kinky, but I am such an advocate for the principles that I see in it, because it is just phenomenal when it comes to consent, when it comes to explicit consent, like really honest communication, the understanding that desire is negotiated and not assumed, which kind of ties into what we were just discussing, I think, in terms of the fantasy, figuring out what really works best for the two people.
I'd be curious to probe a little here. As a self-identified polyamorous person, how do you feel that your poly journey has caused a shift in your thinking? Like, do you think that there are major frameworks that you've had to really reconsider as a result of that? What do you feel comfortable sharing with us?
Oh gosh, I think, it's funny because you were talking about like these expectations in your community, and then I think of like the expectations in the polyamory community and how it's so like different everywhere. Like everybody has their own definition of how they practice polyamory, what's okay, the type of people that they'll date. I think the biggest kind of hot button issue right now is the whole hierarchical polyamory, where you have a quote primary partner, and then there's other partners, and then there's this power imbalance. And so I think that was really hard for me coming in, especially as somebody who's an overachiever and does really well with like expectations of like, oh, I'm going to crush this. Like I crushed monogamy. I've been married for almost 21 years. Like, yes, I'm going to be like the best polyamorous person out there. And then I was significantly humbled because I had no idea what I was doing. And it was so much more diverse than I expected.
And you talked about that power imbalance with like the sort of primary person that
Yeah.
you're linked up to. So how would you suggest, because I'm curious about polyamory.
Sure.
I always
Yeah.
have been, because it just seems like, you'll never be alone. You'll always have all these people that love you. But like, how do people like approach this situation with total equality?
I think it depends. There's like the whole equity versus equality perspective so I think of the example that I use I have 3 kids. I love them all deeply. I say I love them equally, but how that love is shown is not going to be equitable. So one kid may need more FaceTime with me, like me running them around. Another kid may need more emotional support. Another kid, or what happens when 2 of my kids move halfway across the world and one lives down the street. I may see the one that lives down the street way more than I do the other 2, and our relationship may look differently, but I don't love them any less. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. As a person who lives overseas and has all of my siblings and family based back in Australia, there's a question of how do you feel fulfilled in your familial connections when there is such a undeniable and oftentimes irreversible distance that you can't just, like, I can't just go and see my mum. I can't even call her right now. She's in bed asleep. It is too late in Australia.
Yeah.
She is out like a light. So you're absolutely right that thing of different people need different things. And also, as you've been expressing, we all come to all of these situations with our different baggages and our different experiences and marginalizations that still exist within those spaces. One of the most interesting things I get to witness within gaining community is the notion that because we're a part of a microcosm, that somehow all of the problems that exist in the real world don't manage to make their way into the space. Like, I'm only here because I'm horny. That's great. You're still processing your racism as a human being who's grown up in a racist society, so you should still be considerate about how you treat black members of the community versus the white members. And same thing with sexism, same thing with all of the isms and phobias. Like, we should still be very conscious of what we bring as biases into that, because believe it or not, we're all looking to have a good time here. And so actually the best way to ensure that everyone has a good time is to be more considerate of how we ensure that, and therefore being considerate of our words and our actions and inferences in all of those moments. God, this is a really good conversation. Okay, so I would be curious here, because we're talking a lot around, especially for people of diverse bodies and genders and experiences where we are sort of trained not to trust ourselves, and to, the fact of standing up for ourselves is a radical act of self-trust and everything else. How do you, in your work in particular, how do you help people to navigate that and to begin to build that for themselves?
Yeah, I think it's hard because, especially I see this among women, is that we are rewarded and praised for self-abandonment during childhood. And so we are wired that, like, this idea of trusting ourselves and prioritizing ourselves is so not only foreign, but it can prevent us from being loved and accepted. So I think being aware of how the role that self-abandonment has played versus, and I know that it's not necessarily the opposite of self-trust, but in terms of navigating self-trust, I think it's helpful when we're able to differentiate between harm and discomfort. And a lot of people don't like sitting with discomfort and are quick to dismiss things, especially around like non-normative desire. So considering how you can trust, like, am I trusting myself in exploring this desire? Am I able to feel aligned? Does it feel authentic to me? Or am I choosing to ignore it because that feels safe, because I don't like sitting with discomfort?
I'd be curious to ask from your perspective, because occasionally someone will be a part of the community for a while and then they will leave it and then they will go and they will talk about it really negatively, like they were
Mm,
groomed into doing it or that they
right.
were manipulated into doing it, this, that, and the other. Like they'll go on to podcasts and talk about how they were manipulated into being a feedee or whatever. What do you think, like, I guess I'm trying to ask someone who is in that place of confusion and doesn't really know exactly, is this really right for me, but is going along with it just because they're getting attention for it. Like, how do we how do we help people like that, I guess? Because like we don't want to see it keep happening. Like we don't want people to feel that they've been uh, you
Maybe
know, sexually hijacked and made to do something they don't want to do.
maybe it's a question to add here. Maybe it's a question on discernment within the self. Maybe it's people who they think they have that desire and maybe they're looking to explore it and figure it out for themselves. Maybe it's people who, because it's size driven, exist in larger bodies, and again, because of that bias, they have only ever known narratives that, you know, talk down to them, make them feel lesser than for their bodies, and now they've discovered a community that actually uplifts and celebrates it. So maybe their intentions are not aligned in the same fashion. They still maybe get a positivity out of it, because they're seeing themselves being celebrated. But ultimately, the core of it, which is to get larger and to celebrate size, is not something that is like a part of them, right? Maybe that's the. Do you feel like that's fair, Tim? Like a question of
Yeah,
discernment,
yeah,
maybe?
that's what I was trying to.
That's okay. What do you think of that?
I think people are very uncomfortable with the idea of fluidity. And so what could be that person, let's say, who is like, really like pro whatever community they're part of, and then something happens where they usually feel a sense of rejection, or there's something that's triggered in them that they haven't healed. And instead of sitting and dealing with that, it's a lot easier to create distance and to demonize the community that you just came from instead of trying to repair. So I think just being aware of a person's history and like their involvement in different causes or communities is helpful to kind of get an idea of, like, I have a friend who has a history of being like super attached to like one best friend, and then they have a really bad toxic falling out, and then she attaches to a new person. And so when you're aware of somebody's like MO, then you start to be like, okay, I just need to be cautious around how I navigate with this person in this space.
That makes me think of, and I'll speak truth to it because this was a bit of my experience. Same-sex attraction within religious communities, it's a question around conversion therapy and people perhaps sometimes who experience trauma as queer people and they have an experience where they feel that perhaps they are near death or something major happens for them. Religious outreach happens to be there at the time. They grab it with both hands and they seem to have a real come to Jesus moment, flip the script immediately, suddenly it's born again, no longer gay, living a very certain type of a lifestyle. And I think what a lot of that psychological research indicates is that there was no real healing from whatever the addiction or coping mechanism was. It's just in a moment of high intense emotional stuff, they just pivoted from one thing that they were really holding on to another thing. And yeah, that I feel like that does kind of make sense. We're not going to name any names here, of course, but I think just Tim and I, we're probably thinking of the same people who we've observed, who have sort of who've modeled a bit of that, and I think that does make sense. So as you say, like being aware of people's history and being mindful of our own engagements, how we, yes, we're there to receive a pleasure or receive an enjoyment of a connection, but still we can be respectful of the other person and where they're at, maybe what they're struggling with, and maybe it just behooves us to ask more questions, to be like, hey, I know we maybe talked about this at that point, but how are you feeling about that now? Maybe you brought something up in one of our other conversations and I was meaning to ask you about it. Like, how does that sit with you? What are your thoughts around that thing? And I understand maybe that's not like super duper sexy in the moment, like leads to the thing that you were planning on, but it's still it's granting consideration to the person, because if you're considerate enough of them to want to do the fucking, maybe you could also be considerate enough of them just to make sure that, generally speaking, that they're good to go into the fucking.
I think something to consider is the role that shame plays one of the things that I found within the polyamory community, or even monogamous men, that's just been my experience. I'm heterosexual, unfortunately, that the people in my community, or the monogamous men that I've dated, think that they're more capable of dating a non-traditional, non-normative person. And then they start to develop feelings and that shame of like, holy shit, what are other people going to think about me? What are my parents going to say? I also tend to date younger men. And so then there's that age gap also situation going on. And they're like, I'm out. And so you can't be naive. And because shame is such a powerful motivator that prevents people from really fully, if they don't have community, like really invested in that community, I think that's one of the things that really not saves people, but supports people and keeps them connected, is that community. And when they don't have that, when they live in isolation, when they let the shame win, it will win pretty much every time.
You emphasize honesty in relationships. What can people practice to help them feel more capable of expressing themselves honestly, especially in tense situations?
Oh gosh, the first thing that comes to mind is this concept of safety. Like if people don't feel safe, they're not going to be able to really be honest. Because for myself, I think of when I've been honest and there's been a punishment or significant consequence, I'm like, fuck that. Like, I might as well just have like kept it to myself. Like now I have to deal with all of this on top of that. So I think that honesty can only really come if people are allowed to express themselves, obviously respectfully, and not necessarily, it's not that it's okay. Well, yeah, if you're monogamous and you went and fuck somebody else and you're like, okay, well, I want to be honest with you. Well, now you're all mad at me. Like we have to be willing to take accountability and responsibility for our actions in conjunction with that safety and communication.
It's part of that broader conversation that sometimes, not that honesty, that we shouldn't be honest, but it's the reality that sometimes honesty does lead to unsafety. I think about it through the lens of queerness, right? Like it's all well and good to say, hey, young queer kids, come out of the closet. But as we have all seen aplenty in the world, you might very well do that, and that's not a good time for you. That puts you in an unsafe position. In some instances, the dishonesty, the self-preservation is what's most important. Get yourself through school, get yourself a little job, get the fuck out of Dodge and send them a letter. Don't give return address. Do what you have to do if that's really what that comes down to. But I think that's so important. It is not just honesty pure and simple. It is measured with accountability and that sense of safety. That is very, very important, especially when you consider, a lot of what ends up being the perceived critique of gaming and fetism is the idea that it is somehow at its root a non-consensual act, right? It's always presented through the lens of heterosexuality. Fuck the queers. We don't exist, apparently. It's always skinny men and fat women. And it's always through the lens of he's devious and trying to fatten her up until she dies. And she's somehow infantilized to the point that she either doesn't understand what's happening to her, or because she's so fat, she clearly hates herself she doesn't care that he's killing her because she thinks that it's real life. All of those perspectives, like they're so toxic, just even at the core. And yet, that's the narrative that needs to be combated, the idea that there is somehow something very intrinsically wrong with the thing. But how do you prevent that? Those exact pillars, the honesty of what we're doing, the truth of it, it's the safety to be able to say it, and it's the consent. It's the saying, yeah, I know what's going to happen to my body, but I'm giving the thumbs up. I am enthusiastically saying, yes, this is fine. And, all of those tropes.
Well, I think too, also being able to change, like the permission to change my mind. Like one of the things that my husband, who's monogamous, we check in a lot. And right now, the last 4 years 3.5 years that we've had an open marriage, I will say, hey, are you still okay with this? Are you still like feeling good about this? But even though I would prefer him to be supportive of it, he has the right to change his mind and say, I'd really like a monogamous partner. And I have to respect that if he makes that choice.
100%, because that's your partner. That's who you've chosen to be with. And if it's as simple as, well, he's not supportive and I still want this, well then baby, we have some big conversations that we need to start thinking through. Yep. And I think you're absolutely right. It's the shame in that moment of, I know what this is beginning to infer. I know the kind of conversation, I don't want to go there. So I'm just going to smooth away from that stressful type of conversation. And it's fine. I'll capitulate and I'll just do whatever you want because I don't want to have, But actually, those are the really important conversations that need to be had when they come up. Because if we avoid them, then we further ourselves down the line, farther away from a time when we could have navigated things with more comfort.
Yep.
Oh,
Where do you think that fear of confrontation comes from? Like, I can sometimes think back on my childhood and think about like things that I witnessed, like arguments between my parents, right?
Mhm.
And it was an immediate, let's not address what's actually wrong. Let's just smooth it over and keep the peace so that we can all sit at the dinner table.
Mhm.
And now my parents wonder why I have avoided certain conflicts in my life. And it's like, but
Mhm.
that's what I saw, you know? So I'm just wondering if it really goes that far back that it's from witnessing our parents do it, or if there's some kind of societal trend about just avoiding conflict at all cost.
I mean, it's a couple of things. There is an evolutionary hardwire for us to belong. And so we perceive conflict as a potential for us to become excommunicated. So if this conflict escalates to the point of pack your shit and get out, then I'm out here in the middle of nowhere and a lion is going to eat me and I'm all alone, like, so we have to override the primitive part of our brain. So there's like that, going on in the background. I think that communication is a skill. And a lot of people don't have the skill to respectfully, calmly, regulated communicate how they feel and why they're upset by, whatever the issue is leading to the confrontation. And so instead of investing in acquiring those skills and learning how to be a stronger communicator, it's a lot easier to just shut it down and pretend like everything's fine. I'm just like so happy all the time. Everything's great, you know?
and then you've got the reality again with the gaining of it all. I find that this is a critique I lob to people who express a purely sexual narrative around their gains and growth. Because, of course, that's why we've done it. Obviously, bitch. That's why I'm doing it. I actually didn't need you to explain that to me. We're all here because we enjoy that. But my question is, after you have done your business and you are now sober again and you look in the mirror, you have done something very life-changing to your body. Your shape is different. Your physicality is different. Your wardrobe is different. Your lifestyle is different. Things are changing. And how do you really feel about that? You're not horny right now. Look me in the eye. What is this doing to you?
Right.
And it's okay if you're feeling challenged. And it's okay if there's an incongruency there. Acknowledge it so you can explore it. But what I've found over the years is that there are certain people I've noticed who, by boon of genetics, or maybe they had help, who knows, they gained a lot of weight in a very short amount of time. You get to witness it online. Everybody loves it because we're seeing this fantasy level transformation right in front of our eyes. And then comes the inevitable post of, I've just had a checkup from a doctor, my health has gone downhill, I'm terrified, this is not what I had in mind for myself, I'm leaving everything behind, abandoning ship, never look for me. It's such a stark contrast because there was no processing of that internal struggle. This is all very fascinating to dig through, my God. I'm loving this conversation.
Me too.
But to that point, I would like to ask you here, because you've written another book as well, your memoir, Opened, which you talk about exploring identity and unraveling one's old self. Thinking in mind this sort of thing I'm talking about here. How do you find things like those body changes, weight gain, softness, expansion, can sometimes catalyze with identity shifts?
Yeah, I think identity shifts are real. Like everything that you were talking about in terms of what you're just sharing about gaining a lot of weight really fast, it reminded me of my journey into the non-monogamy community and how it felt like trying to drink water out of a fire hose. But because nobody in your community, nobody in my community, we're not celebrated. We're not there's not really models growing up of like, oh, this is what a healthy transition into this community looks like, or this is how healthiness can, exist in here. And so you're just kind of like winging it, but also dealing with so much dopamine. And that is a really powerful shit. So yeah.
Many plus size people are told that they should be grateful, grateful that anyone wants to sleep with them at all, rather than feeling entitled to someone being sexually attracted to them. Like, how do you challenge that?
I think it goes back to this notion that, thinness is the standard. And so I just find it so odd, I guess is the nicest way to say it, is that really what we want? Love for people or pleasure for people is like a sense of, like you should be grateful because really nobody wants you. And so just like take whatever you can get. That I don't see people who are in non typical bodies as less than, but people who say things like that to those individuals do. And so why would you take advice from somebody who sees you as less than anything?
I mean, even the adage of, when you're young, people will say, you get advice on finances from your parents. But if your parents famously do not do very well with their money, don't ask them that.
100%.
Who do you have access to that is who do you have access to that is mirroring the life or the thing that you want to have? Like, oh, it's actually my friend's parents. It's a teacher at school. As you get older, maybe it's someone you work with, someone in your industry. Find ways to connect with them and be honest and say, I'm looking to model or mirror rather what you've been modeling. Are you open to some form of mentorship here, some form of conversation? I'd love to learn. I'd love to get some knowledge around this if you feel open to sharing. And baby, hosting a podcast, what do we find? There are plenty of people who want to share their knowledge, and there is some brilliant knowledge that is out there. I think we maybe just need to have more opportunity to think like, don't just ask the first person that comes along. Have some discernment on who you're asking and why you're asking that person.
Yep, absolutely.
How do you help clients differentiate between being desired as a whole person versus being reduced to a single aspect of their body or their kink?
I see the whole person desire, including curiosity, accountability, care, versus when we reduce somebody to their fetish or their body or whatever, it's very consumptive and one-dimensional. And I really am not a fan of that at all.
Totally fair. But I would be curious here, because you've been sharing with us about, having to learn when it comes to the polyamory of it all. And of course, broadly speaking, any kind of queer or kinky relationship will rewrite those traditional relationship rules. Outside of, the learning, the processing, what do you feel has excited you the most when it comes to learning about this alternative model of intimacy?
One of the things that I value so much, and polyamory really magnified for me, is living intentionally. So I felt like monogamy, I was going through the motions of what I was supposed to do, and I was doing that well and being rewarded for that, but it didn't feel, it's kind of like when you were talking about the one night stand and how you felt really empty, Tim, like that's how I would describe it. And so being in this community, being my polyamorous authentic self, I really feel like I'm able to choose and create as opposed to defaulting to the script that was handed to me.
And something I will say that it's kind of coming back for me. You said this early on. When you live as a person who, be it gender or disability, size, whatever it is, you live in a body where people have always asserted their dominance over you, the way that even to stand up for yourself is a radical act of self-fulfillment. What does reclaiming pleasure look like when you begin on that journey? For anyone listening who's wanting to do that or is trying to do that maybe they don't know what that looks like, what are some signs that they could maybe look to say, holy shit, I'm actually doing the damn thing, and maybe I'm not feeling all the way there yet, but you know what? Bitch, I'm on that journey. What does that look like?
I think a lot of it, the first thing that pops to mind is not apologizing. Like not apologizing for what you look like, how you speak, how much space you take up, not feeling like you have to shrink yourself. And obviously in your community, not literally, but like, all the things. And then also, I would say not feeling rushed. So when you are present, when you are moving at the speed that you feel most comfortable at, that is when that process of reclaiming pleasure is occurring.
And you talk about the stories we inherit about sex and worth. What are some stories around fat and femininity that you think urgently need rewriting?
Oh gosh, other than what we've talked about in terms of that if you're not skinny, then you're less than somehow. I think that this idea that softness is weakness, that desirability must be earned, or you have to, in order to be desired or be desirable, you have to fit into a certain model. That's actually something that I have learned being polyamorous and putting myself out there in the dating market, because that's just wasn't my experience 22 years ago, is the amount of men who so when I put myself on the dating market 3.5 years ago, I was like, I had 3 babies. My breasts aren't as perky as like a 25-year-old's. Like, I don't look like the version of beautiful that I thought that all men would want. And I was shocked, one, at the amount of younger men that were interested in women my age, but two, the amount of men that preferred women that were not thin, that were curvy, that were soft. I cannot tell you, I was blown away by that. And that was something that really helped heal my relationship with my body, because I started to realize that the narrative was a lie. Like, that this was just another way of society trying to control women and keep us small.
We find something similar in the gay community, because so the public image of gay men is that they're all, trim, gorgeous, supermodel-esque, great at all of the artistic talents, when in reality, there are a lot of younger guys that want an older man. There are a lot of younger guys that want a dad bod. They want something that it feels to them like safety, security, and comfort. Whereas the bad boy who might be trim and tight with all the tattoos and, could fuck you 6 ways from Sunday is probably going to leave you in the lurch somewhere.
Yeah.
So,
but also baby, but people talk about it, right? It's like, what is a man like that? He has no home. He does not own a top sheet. Okay, his mattress threadbare. Okay, if he has a fucking bed frame, okay, clock it. That man is looking to get into your bed because he's like, she can cook me 3 squares a day and she's nice. Like, that's, And listen, baby, if you want that dynamic, again, with knowledge and consent and authority, you go for that. But also understand what this is,
Exactly.
The narratives that we all teach. And again, the beauty of queerness in all forms. And I know sometimes people debate this. I would argue if you are kinky and identify as straight cisgendered, I think you're queer. I think if you're polyamorous but cisgendered straight, I think you're queer. I think the definition of what queer is anything that goes above and beyond the scope that society says is the main thing that you should be doing. I think it's gay as hell. So welcome to this side of the conversation.
Thank you. Yay, thank you.
Yes. But I think what is beautiful about queer dynamics is that you have a front row seat to the unfurling of every thread of this tapestry of bullshit. And when you begin to unpick one, you realize that it all just comes apart. And you realize, it wasn't just your particular flavor. As you say, polyamorous. You go, I've unpacked that and I can be polyamorous. I can go on that journey. Brilliant. But then you begin unpicking that thread and you're like, well, shit, my very womanness that I felt like I had to have been beholden to stuff that into this poly framework I'm trying to figure out. I don't even have to adhere to that. This idea of being a quote-unquote traditional mother or being this or being whatever. You don't have to hold on to any of it if it doesn't serve you. You get to put everything in the goddamn bin, pick out every single one of your favorite treats, and have girl dinner. You get to have it exactly the way you want it.
It's like that moment in The Wizard of Oz where, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. You realize it's all just smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, it is. And I think people get really threatened by me online on social media. Well, when I say people, I mean men, because they think that I'm trying to convert them or their wives to polyamory. And really, it's just helping people see behind the curtain. I don't care. Yeah. My husband's monogamous. He's aware of what's behind the curtain and he still feels most aligned with monogamy. You don't have to be, gay or queer or kinky or whatever to be self-aware of the narratives that are being pushed on us. You can still choose the life that you have, the default script. That's okay. Some people love Times New Roman when they're in their, their documents. I like a different font, but that make them feel good. Okay, but at least there's other options and you continue to choose Times New Roman.
We had this conversation with someone recently, and it feels like the quintessential core of all of this comes down to just a variation on the same one question. Some people will be introduced to the concept of something new, and they will go, why? Why should I care? Why are you telling me about this? Why do you think I should engage with that? And then the other group of people are saying, why not? Why not? Why not figure it out? I am not afraid of it being a no. I'm not afraid of it not being a good time, because at least I tried.
Right.
At least I found out. To that point, I think there's something to be asked here. So we're talking around about so much of this sense of transformation that goes on for so many people in so many different ways. And I want to ask you this here, as a woman, as someone, who's, you say you've been married for 20 years, and so you're a little later on in life than some other people, and you've been through bodily changes having been a mother. You've gone through so many different phases and variations of your own sense of self. For people who are going on a journey of unpacking themselves and learning about themselves and transforming themselves, where do you begin? Where do you recommend that they begin?
I think the first part is believing that you're deserving of the journey to explore. That was what I needed to do. I was so scared for so long and didn't believe that I was really deserving of pleasure. And when people hear the word pleasure, they think sex a lot of times. And yet, sure, sexual pleasure is a very small part of it. The definition of pleasure is happiness and joy. And I didn't really see myself as worthy and deserving of a pleasure-filled life. And so when I finally started to say, you know what, I'm not a martyr. I don't need to be this selfless mother and wife that puts everyone else before them and then dies resentful. No, you don't get a prize for finishing miserable. That's when I was okay, I'm allowed to explore these desires, because I truly believe that our desires are the doorway to our destiny. And I know that sounds cheesy as fuck, but it is 100% accurate. Every person has this beautiful bucket of desires that is these little breadcrumbs that are leading you along the path. And we're so scared. Some of us are just so terrified of where that's going to lead us, because we're afraid that we're going to be so far off the path of what is expected of us and what's appreciated and celebrated, that they ignore those breadcrumbs and they end up miserable.
Our desires led us to create this.
Yay!
That's part of our destiny.
Yeah.
And because of that, we get to be here. We get to have this incredible fucking conversation, Courtney. I cannot tell you this is so fucking good. Holy shit. Something I will say here, right? I talked a little earlier about, my journey. I did the born again Christian thing for a time in my life. And there is something that has always stuck out to me as one of the few things that they said that I was like, shit, I actually kind of agree with that. It was a class on the destiny. The idea of, well, do you even choose your own destiny if God has a plan for you, if he's already put it in you? How do I even know what my destiny is? And, we were young people. We're 16, 17, 18, freaking out about the future and what we were supposed to do with our lives.
Right.
And the person who was leading the class was just what do you like doing? And people were I like anime. I like music. I like this. Great. That's your fucking destiny, bitch. We go through... Sometimes we go through this whole, I have to search my soul, I have to go on a journey, I have to go on this a pilgrimage to find... Baby, shut the fuck up and, take a sip of water, have a nap.
Yep.
And, take a deep breath. Bitch, what do you enjoy? And, if we believe that there is some kind of destiny out there for us, something that is innate to us, what do you already like? That's probably it. We don't need to, attach ourselves to this idea of there is a specific model or framework, because if it's already within you, then baby, exemplify that. You don't need to worry about how am I supposed to be the best architect around if my real passion is drawing. Work on being the best drawer around, because that's already within you. Challenge yourself. Find opportunities business-wise, if that's what we need to do. We do live in a capitalist hellscape, so if you need to be making money, find opportunities that most closely align so you don't wind up in a bad financial situation, because all that. But, sometimes that's all it is. You kind of already know within you. And I think this is so many gainers' experience, and this was probably your experience as a polyamorous person. You just knew that you knew that you knew that this is what you were. And until the moment that you finally stood up and fucking said, this is who and what I am, you were sat there going, well, is it not? I don't know. And then the moment you said it, everything fell into place and you just went, oh my God. Yes, I am this thing. And everything makes sense now because of it. All of that.
Yes. Amen.
How would you advise navigating, being both visible and being open about desire and identity while still protecting your inner life?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially as somebody who's so visible online as myself. I choose to, I think Like when people will ask me a question and it feels uncomfortable inside me, like I physically am like, oh, I don't know if then I'm like, nope, I'm not going to answer that. I spent so much of my life living out of obligation. And so sometimes I try to be I have a little bit of an education background. And so I want to help people and I want to educate, but I think sometimes people don't have the best of intentions. And so when I get those pings, that I trust them. And so for me, it's really about balancing that sense of obligation and accessibility with my integrity and my peace. So there are certain things, I'm a very open person. I talk about pretty much anything. You can ask me anything. And then there's a hard line of something that I don't share online. And I feel good about that. Will that change in the future? I don't know. But for right now, and what it's been the last couple of years, is this line. And I feel good about that.
That's phenomenal. And I want to ask here, as we begin to, we're going to start to wrap out soon, for people who are maybe on a similar journey where they are in the middle of it, because you're never at the end. You're always somewhere in the middle. You've learned a bit, you're sharing with other people, you're still learning. As you say, there are still things that you're keeping private to yourself, and it's a constant negotiation, conversation about what does and what doesn't and what situation, and all of this stuff. For anyone who's on a journey like that at the moment, what do you want to share with them here?
Everyone will have an opinion about your life. You will never please everybody. And I think it is totally okay to be afraid of disappointing people, but I would encourage you to stop disappointing yourself. Stop being the one that gets disappointed and believe that you are truly deserving and worthy of love.
And there's a question that we like to ask everybody. It's a bit of a fun one. What food gives you life and what food brings you peace?
Oh gosh, what food brings me life? I would say I like food that is like crispy, salty, indulgent, and it like shared with others, like a great like homemade tortilla chips where you're sitting around and like guacamole and it's this communal experience. It's a very polyamorous answer of me. I think in terms of what brings me peace are the meal that pops into mind is spaghetti, like spaghetti bolognese. That was something that my mom made. She is not a good cook, but it was the one meal that always brought my family of origin together, and it's just so comforting and it's so warming, and I could make it with my eyes closed. So I feel at peace with that.
I love it. And as a final question here, my love, we've talked around so much today, and I feel like you've already given such great pointers to people, places to start. Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that you feel like here at the end of the episode that we haven't gotten to that you think, let's grab that before we go?
Oh, gosh, I really want people to. So one of the things that I think about when being a woman in a patriarchal society or being, queer in a patriarchal society is this idea of resistance. And for me, living polyamorously is my act of resistance to the patriarchy. It is my defiance of reclaiming my own body of liberation. And so I think that if, your community ever feels, like, is this worth it? Am I a part of it? Like, or not a part of it, but is it worth it? And am I really like doing what I should be doing, quote unquote, is really thinking about it from that lens of, okay, maybe I can be kind of this badass revolutionist in a sense.
That's phenomenal.
That's my final thought.
No, I love it. And I mean, Courtney, I just want to ask here as well, what have you got coming up next? Have you got books coming? Have you got shows? What have you got? Tell us everything.
Yeah. So my memoir opened, it comes out, and I'll be doing like book tours and pop-up book clubs. So if you have people like a book club and you would love for me to be a part of it and facilitate a discussion, I can do it virtually. I'm looking to do like author readings and facilitate just conversations like this. I love conversations like this. It brings me life, and hoping to do more speaking and workshops and retreats.
I love it. And I love that you said conversations like this give you life, because, baby, this has been one of the most energizing conversations. I just feel myself brimming with like, oh my gosh, it's equal parts. I have so many questions, but also everything feels so answered and so fulfilled. This was brilliant. Courtney, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Where can our listeners find you online?
The easiest way to find me is on Courtney Boyer Coaching. That's on like Instagram and TikTok. And then my husband and I have a YouTube channel and an Instagram account called the Monopolycouple. And that's where we talk about our life as a monogamous, polyamorous couple.
Absolutely perfect. Oh my God. Well, listen, y'all, that is a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, leave us a good review. Now, listen, y'all, if you liked this episode, the podcast, our guest, or just us in general, please share it with your friends, encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram at thiccymouse and Grommr at Orpheus. You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or visit our website at podpage.com/thiccradio. If you'd like to become a financial supporter of the show, you can donate through our PayPal, and you can always email us at thethiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Spotify podcast.
Artwork, media design, editing, and production by James Heinzen.
With original theme music by CYMK.